Hello to wherever you are in the world. If you're very lucky, perhaps you're listening to this presentation in the company of a horse, which is much nicer than sitting in a dark, too cold lecture theater for hours on end. Thank you to the International Society for Equitation Science for inviting me to give this presentation, which really is in honor of the horse. I'm Dr. Katrina Merkies, and this is A Match Made in Heaven. The outside of a horse is good for the inside of a man or a woman. I'm sure most of you have heard this saying, which is often credited to Churchill, but it was a popular saying well before his time. For example, Theodore Parker made the same remark in a text written in 1863 in regards to the cure for various diseases, including unhappiness in marriage. Lord Palmerston, British Prime Minister in the mid-19th century, used the saying in a monthly science publication in January 1881 to note that a brisk trot for 15 minutes will cause more pressure upon and stimulation of the liver, thus curing indigestion. An article in the American Foreign Hand in Britain, published in 1885, stated that the outside of a horse was also good for the inside of a woman, since a woman looks positively captivating on a horse, and so she stands double a chance of capturing a man. Praise for that. Sir John Lubbock was an influential English banker, politician, scientist, antiquarian, and man of letters. He was influenced by his father's friend, Charles Darwin, in his pioneering in the experimental study of animal behavior and promoting of natural selection. His treatise on the use of life, published in 1894, included the phrase, "in the matter of human health." Winston Churchill himself was an avid lover of horses. As a sickly and small child, horses became a physical way to prove himself. His small frame made him a natural at it, and his ability in the saddle saved his life on multiple occasions. He served as a cavalryman, played polo into his 50s, was still riding to hounds in his late 70s, and kept a successful thoroughbred racing stable into his 80s. In a House of Commons speech on the 24th of June, 1952, he said, "I have always considered that the substitution of the internal combustion engine for the horse marked a very gloomy milestone in the progress of mankind." The love of horses has permeated human culture since time immemorial. A quick search on Amazon can quickly retrieve months' worth of reading material about how horses saved a human life, how they touched a human soul, how they teach us life skills, how they help us find inner strength and peace, and so on. There is also a surfeit of information on how humans view horses. Just to touch on a couple of studies that I am most intimate with. In a survey asking whether they believed horses could feel emotions, participants strongly agreed that horses were capable of experiencing affective states, including fear, pain, boredom, frustration, depression, sadness, jealousy, anger, happiness, and love. Humans believe in a bond with a horse, regardless of what country a person comes from, how much money they make, their age, gender, discipline, or experience with horses. People appear to regard the bond with a horse in much the same way. The most frequent references to a bond with a horse involve the horse approaching them, vocally greeting them, trusting them in a frightening situation, taking care of them during hardships, and physically touching them. This implies a universal level of understanding of how humans regard the horse. Jakob von Uexküll, a German biologist, coined the term Umwelt around the beginning of the 20th century. Umwelt refers to the perception of one's environment by one's own senses and nervous system. Von Uexküll believed that organisms create and shape their own Umwelt, guided by their unique evolutionary histories and individual experiences. Thus, even if two animals of the same species reside in the same environment, they can each experience it quite differently. It becomes a challenge for us humans to step outside ourselves and imagine the equine Umwelt, but that doesn't mean that we should not try. Animals have a view that matters, and in our quest to provide a good life for them, we are obliged to consider this point of view. Let's start with a definition of welfare. Academics may refer to affective states, biological functioning, and natural living to different degrees as welfare, whereas non-specialists rely more on their concept of the environment and/or functioning regardless of how the animal may feel. My PhD student, Cordy Dubois, conducted a Delphi study which showed that while experts could agree on scenarios where physical welfare was clearly reduced, there was far more discrepancy among them regarding scenarios in which social and emotional needs might be compromised. It is more difficult to evaluate good or poor welfare from an emotional or psychological aspect than a purely health or biological functioning aspect. A major issue is lack of knowledge, but the challenge is always how to address this. I will refer to this a little later in this talk. Let's start by considering how horses view humans. I will preface this by saying that there is a lot of research already published and many good reviews of the points I will touch upon. I had to be very conservative in selecting only a few studies to highlight, so I apologize in advance for those I left out, and I do refer the listener to consult other sources. Here is some of what we do know. We are familiar with the idea that horses can see almost all the way around them, with a blind spot directly in front and behind them. We also understand that horses have monocular vision, except for the area right in front of them. This binocular field of view allows the horse to judge distance, for which the horse needs to raise its head. Horses likely see much better at a distance than humans do, but lack the ability for fine focus on objects near to them. While a horse's vision is inferior to humans in daylight conditions, horses do see better than us in low light conditions. In terms of colors, horses appear to be able to distinguish orange, yellow, blue, and green, but have difficulty discerning the color red. Early research found that when signals for food were placed above eye level, horses were less successful on a basic operant task than when the stimuli were placed at or below eye level. And more recent research by Hall et al. Found that when stimuli were placed at ground level, horses were even more successful. Since equine vision is less distinct, sounds and smells become much more salient to the horse. Horses use smell to recognize conspecifics through fecal odors and to communicate. Horses smell each other's groin area to determine the state of arousal, health, age, reproductive status. Horse whisperers of old used to rub a horse's chestnuts on their hands or equipment to get the horse to accept them. It is not such a stretch to accept that horses can smell human emotions. For example, body odor samples were collected from humans in fear and happiness conditions. Horses raised their heads, displaying vigilance, and tended to touch the person more often and longer when smelling fear samples. Horses lowered their heads and were more relaxed with the happiness odor. Domestication itself appears to favor the development of the ability to recognize heterospecific emotions. Research by Smith et al. Revealed that horses shown a photograph of a happy or angry human displayed left eye gaze bias and increased heart rate toward the angry face. Following on that, Prof et al. Determined that horses meeting a live person with a neutral face hours after being shown a photograph of that person displaying either a happy or angry face, exhibited an initial left eye gaze bias, looked longer, and showed more displacement behaviors like scratching, sniffing, licking, and chewing when meeting the angry person. Those exposed to the happy photo showed no initial eye gaze bias, but looked longer with their right eye. There were, however, no differences in horse heart rate or heart rate variability when meeting the neutral person, regardless of which emotion the horse had viewed in the photograph previously. My own master's student conducted a study using live humans to determine if horses can distinguish human facial expressions. 20 ponies were exposed to each of 2 trained actors presenting joy, sadness, angry, or neutral facial expressions. The ponies looked more often with their left eye first toward angry or sad expressions compared to joy. Ponies looked longer toward angry expressions in comparison to others, and again there was no difference in heart rate or in latency to approach the actor. Reading emotional cues enables individuals to predict other individuals' behavior and determine situation-appropriate behaviors. Facial expressions are important social signals for social bonding, aggression avoidance, navigation of future encounters with specific individuals, and it may influence the individual's own affective state. Horses do not have a large vocal repertoire, but they can transmit information and social intentions through vocalizations. For example, horse vocalizations can convey the sex, size, and reproductive status of the caller. It was discovered in Briefer et al.'s work that emotion and arousal are individually encoded in acoustic qualities. It would be useful for horses to be able to also recognize social intentions through listening to human vocalizations. Lamp and Andre in 2012 played back an audio recording from a person known to the horse while in the presence of an unknown person. Horses focus their attention more quickly and for longer, indicating recognition of the incongruent situation. Further, my study with draft horses showed that when hearing a recording of a stern voice, they moved faster in the round pen, while they reduced movement when a pleasant voice was played. Horses also oriented their body toward the human more often when a pleasant tone was played. A large study by Haleski et al. Spanning 2 continents asked horses to cross a tarpaulin on the ground, with the handler using either a soothing voice or a harsh voice whenever the horse made forward progress. However, there were no differences between treatment groups in completion of the task, heart rate, or time to reach calmness when crossing the tarp, suggesting that the soothing cues did not enhance their ability to perform a novel task. However, in this instance, the researchers were measuring task completion, not any behaviors associated with how the horses perceive the vocal cues. The provision of negative reinforcement to learn the task was more salient than the vocal cues. Similarly, in Smith et al.'s study, horses froze longer and held their ears forward longer when hearing human growling recordings, suggesting vigilance behavior. Horses did not respond differently to male or female recordings. These results indicate that horses can distinguish some meaning behind our utterances and are prepared to react accordingly. Horses are good at interpreting human actions, much better than we are at interpreting theirs. How many of us hear the common lament that someone can't catch their horse in the field? Birke's study in 2011 showed that a direct approach to a horse in the field, that is, with eye contact and a swinging lead rope, caused horses to move farther away from the human. In naive ponies, flight distance was not affected, but the ponies moved quicker and longer with direct approach, especially a direct, speedy approach. Luckily, this flight distance decreased with handling over 10 sessions from almost 3 meters to 0 meters. A number of factors also influence if horses will voluntarily approach humans. For example, Sondergaard and Halako found that young horses housed individually approached humans quicker than group-housed horses, perhaps speaking more to the relevance of us in their lives. To determine the significance of humans in the horse's Umwelt, Furia et al. Tested school horses with a familiar and unfamiliar person in a variety of approach and handling tests. Results strongly suggest that different memories formed by horses during previous interactions with humans led them to attribute a general positive or negative significance to humans. And concerningly, negative memories had a greater impact on the significance of a human than the positive memories. This is supported by evidence showing that horses can return to feral conditions rather quickly. Goreka Brudsta et al. Found that while stable-born foals approached humans quicker, had higher heart rates, and were easier to handle than forest-born foals, lack of daily contact returned them to feral conditions quickly. Fortunately, they also easily adapted to man-made conditions. So now that we know a little bit about how horses view humans, we can look at how they choose to interact with humans. Horses choose food over humans. Sad but true. A new study just published shows that horses performed a target task better when rewarded with a food reward compared to scratching or petting, showing a bias toward food over human contact. Do horses love their owners, who love and care for them and pay all their bills, more than they love other people? Stone demonstrated that when given a choice, privately owned horses spent more time on the side of the pen with their owner or in the empty space than they did with an unfamiliar person. So this makes us feel good. But perhaps attentiveness is more important. Proofs and McComb showed that horses chose to approach an attentive person with their body and head facing them and their eyes open, over an inattentive person who was facing away or had their head turned away or eyes closed. Horses took longer to approach the inattentive person, perhaps indicating indecisiveness. Also, the horses would walk around to face the inattentive person or nudge them, both strategies to gain their attention. Thus, horses appear to be highly skilled at reading human cues to attention. In support of that, if a horse's attention is highly focused, they become unaware of other environmental cues. Gabor et al. Showed that horses were less reactive to a startle test when focused on a food reward known to be waiting at the end of a corridor. And as a competitive rider, this is what we strive for the horse to pay attention to us and not the bright flowers surrounding the judge's booth. But perhaps it is only that horses hate being alone. My own research has shown repeatedly that horses were more calm when any human was with them compared to being alone. Horses moved slower, carried their head lower, vocalized and chewed less when any human was present with them in the round pen. Round penning techniques, for example, utilize human body posture to elicit specific responses from the horse, including facing forward to drive the horse forward and turning away to slow the horse down. My research studies showed that indeed horses moved at a faster gait when the handler faced the horse's head and moved slower when the handler faced the horse's hind end. In another study from my lab, we looked at how horses responded to pairs of humans who looked similar, but one of them suffered from PTSD, while the other did not. While the individuals looked and moved the same, the horses responded similarly to them, behaviorally, although they had higher heart rates in the presence of the PTSD person. The ability to gain information about the external world is advantageous for survival. How sensitive are horses to cues from other species? And has domestication enhanced this ability and generalization? Studies show that horses are able to follow a sustained pointing cue given by a human to locate a hidden reward, and will approach the correct location if a blue and yellow striped block as a marker is placed beside it. But they do not appear to have an understanding of the communicative gesture from the human. Most often, the horse would approach the outstretched hand first, and the novel marker may have simply attracted their attention. In this regard, horses perform poorer than dogs. And where dogs can use human gaze orientation to locate objects, the horses do not seem to recognize gaze orientation as a salient cue to the location of rewards. We have all learned early in our equestrian careers that we must not show nervousness around horses because they will pick up on that and become nervous as well. There have been conflicting results in the study of emotional transfer from humans to horses. Earliest studies show that people stroking horse with negative thoughts induced an increase in heart rate in the horse, and handlers with positive attitudes could more easily lead a horse through an obstacle course. Equine-assisted activities rely on the premise that therapy horses will intuit emotional distress in the client and work to alleviate that. This altruistic belief may credit horses with more empathy than they possess. In my research, behavioral and physiological responses of horses to humans were more pronounced based on human experience with horses rather than whether the human was diagnosed with a mental disorder. This may be a reflection of the directness and decisiveness of movement associated with humans who are experienced with horses that make the horse more attentive. Emotional intelligence, which is the ability to recognize emotions in oneself and others and to respond appropriately, influences relationships. The cumulative experience of interactions is important in determining the nature of a relationship as positive or negative in an individual's Umwelt, leading to the expectation of how future interactions will proceed. We have already seen various studies showing that horses can recognize different emotions in humans, but there's still no real evidence showing that they share or empathize with those emotions. A thesis written by Debbie Cruz showed synchronization of horse-human EEG over time, particularly with a familiar human. A recent review by Scopa et al. Examined the few studies showing mutual coordination of physiological response between horses and humans during equine-assisted activities, and they suggest a multidisciplinary approach to investigate this further. While not precluding the possibility of shared emotional experiences between horse and human, my own studies have never revealed a synchronization of horse and human heart rate. Further, evidence of recognition of others' emotional state does not imply experience of it. But that may not be necessary for a relationship to exist. I do not need to feel my friend's sadness at the death of a family member, but I can empathize. Do horses empathize? Of course, we would like to believe that our horses empathize with us, that they can feel our happiness or our pain, that they care about us. There has been much research on recognizing indicators of pain and fear in a horse. But aside from removing negative factors in a horse's environment, we also have a responsibility to provide opportunities for positive experiences. The horse's face is a great source of information for those who are looking. Dalla Costa et al. Showed the pain face is characterized by stiffly backward ears, tightening around the eye, tension above the eye area, prominent chewing muscles, tense muzzle, pronounced chin, and flared nostrils. But the pleasure face is also recognizable by relaxed eyes, extended upper lips, and backward ears. Lansada et al. Determined that horses who were gently groomed were more often observed with their necks moderately raised, their eyes half closed, and their upper lips extended and either immobile or twitching, and their ears pointing backward almost in line with the nose. In contrast, horses receiving a more vigorous grooming were more frequently observed with their neck in a high position, eyes wide open or showing the whites, contracted lips with the corner of the mouth raised jerkily, and asymmetrical ears. Of course, the best way to find out how a horse feels about something is to ask him. Preference tests have been employed in numerous research studies, and from this we can learn what a horse prefers, at least of the choices he is given. For example, Lee et al. Showed that horses will choose to go to a paddock with company and food over an empty paddock or working on a treadmill. And Maydell et al. Successfully taught horses to tell them if they wanted their blanket on or off. Another recently reported indicator of positive emotions is snorting. Snorts were associated with positive welfare conditions and with long, loose rein contact, especially while walking. But you may ask if this is truly a positive emotion, or perhaps it is simply an indicator of relief, similar to licking and chewing. Interestingly, humans are able to correctly recognize both the valence and arousal level of horse whinnies fairly accurately, and this does not depend on their age, country of residence, or horse experience. However, females tend to be better at this than males. Failure to recognize behavioral signs of distress or misinterpretation of these signs has implications for horse welfare and horse and human safety. Researchers found a discrepancy in the ability to recognize negative affect between experts and lay survey respondents. Lay respondents were more likely to categorize natural horsemanship and bridleless riding scenarios as positive, perhaps because they appear more natural, but they miss seeing the negative behaviors associated with these scenarios. Survey respondents who indicated that they trained mainly using positive reinforcement, that is, specifically clicker trainers, seemed to have a better understanding of behavior as they correctly identified negative affect more often than other respondents. Emotional state may be influenced greatly by the person interacting with the horse, as horses have been showing to be more willing to approach people dependent on the attitude of their caretaker. But the absence of overt indicators of distress does not equate to the absence of distress. Undesirable behaviors can lead to escalating punitive actions by the handler. With each successive interaction, the horse learns to suppress its natural inclination. Thus, we run the very narrow line of training a horse to do what is required of him and training him to mask the expression of his underlying emotions. There exists an interrelatedness between emotions and welfare, whereby negative emotions act to drive an animal to a solution, while positive emotions drive an animal to seek them more or to repeat them. Emotions are personal to how an individual perceives an event, and thus shapes an individual's Bloomvelt. You might say that emotions direct cognition, that is, the subjective perception of the current situation. Furthermore, cognition influences perceived welfare as much as welfare influences cognition. We can test the relationship between emotion and cognition using cognitive bias tests. It was found that gentle contact with humans and more natural living conditions were associated with more optimistic horses. There is certainly a genetic component to learning that is linked to emotionality, as we can see in breed-specific temperaments. More emotional horses perform poorer, but this might be dependent on the task. Less reactive horses perform better at a negative reinforcement task, while reactive horses perform better at an avoidance task. But there are many individual differences, so it is difficult to clarify the interrelationship between emotion and cognition. There is a long-standing discussion about whether the use of positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement is more beneficial or more ethical in the training of horses. Negative reinforcement is not of itself a bad thing, but in training, and especially if used incorrectly, may be associated with increased stress levels compared to positive reinforcement. When what is first learned is a positive experience, subsequent learning and human-horse interactions are facilitated. And horses remember these positive interactions months and even years later. Positive reinforcement leads to more anticipatory behavior. Horses appear to learn better and faster with a more positive attitude toward the trainer. This has implications on safety around horses for trainers, riders, and handlers. Positively reinforced trained horses also pay more attention to their trainers, thus increasing the probability of successful learning. Sankey et al. Showed that when horses are taught a simple voice command, that is, to stay, and are then taught to generalize this voice command to different contexts, such as at a vet clinic, using positive reinforcement, those horses engage in more affiliative behaviors with known and unknown humans during training. Horses trained with positive reinforcement did not show gaze bias, while ponies that were trained with negative reinforcement did show left eye gaze bias. These lateralization biases may thus well help us identify desirable and less desirable, from the horse's point of view, procedures to train and handle horses. It may be the quality of work, rather than the work itself, that may impact laterality. Environment also may play a role in horse cognition. Rivera et al. Showed that horses kept on pasture with other horses had lower overall training times, displayed less undesirable behaviors, and required less desensitization time to novel equipment. Sankey showed that horses can discriminate between positive and negative interactions, and that cumulative encounters define the relationship, which generalized to positive interactions with any humans even months later. Similarly, Hange and Ingersoll showed that horses could discriminate between previously trained rewarding and non-rewarding stimuli, such as three-dimensional household objects and two-dimensional photographs of these objects, for more than 7 years after the initial training. The way in which humans interact with others and feel about their relationships varies broadly, resulting in a range of attachment styles. Attachment is a reciprocal bond developed over time. Secure attachment styles are associated with well-functioning relationships, while insecure attachment styles can be characterized by the degree of anxiety, avoidance, or disinterest. It is understood that attachment styles between people can be extrapolated to attachment styles with animals. It is certainly clear that humans become attached to their horses, but the question is, do horses become attached to us? Are we more than just conveyors of food? There are 4 main pillars associated with attachment styles. 1. Proximity seeking. 2. Secure base. 3. A safe haven. And 4. Separation distress. These have been qualitatively characterized in some species, including dogs, but have yet to be demonstrated in horses. So far, we only have a few studies to draw from. Payne et al. Showed that horses with one handler more readily approached humans than those with multiple handlers. As noted before, the quality of human interaction can affect proximity seeking, related to the qualities of the caretaker. A foal will retreat to its mother as a secure base, and horses are more willing to explore the world as long as conspecifics are present. Thus, there is no clear evidence of a secure base between a horse and human. Horses will approach a novel object more readily when led by a human. Perhaps we represent a safe haven for them. As mentioned earlier, horses clearly show distress when they are alone, but there is no literature relating to their distress when separated from humans, as long as other horses are present. In general, there is not strong evidence of an attachment of a horse to a human, as horses would choose other horses over humans. Furthermore, attachment to a human in the prolonged absence of other horses is in itself a welfare issue. Ejichi et al. Also looked for evidence of a safe base, hypothesizing that if a bond does exist between a horse and human, then the human should provide a safe base to allow the horse to cope better in a stressful situation. And if this bond is stronger with the horse's owner, then the horse should be less stressed than with an unfamiliar person. But the results showed no difference in completion time, proactive or reactive behaviors, eye temperature, or heart rate variability when they were handled by the owner or an unfamiliar person during a tarp or a streamer test. Thus, no evidence that a bond produces better coping or compliance. Equine-assisted therapy relies on a reliable, positive, close, and reciprocal bond between the horse and human for therapeutic progress. To explore the existence of this bond and the effect of the human's own attachment style, we studied behavioral and physiological responses of therapy horses to at-risk youth in a 10-week equine-facilitated learning program. Horses displayed more affiliative behaviors, such as seeking physical contact with the youth, and had less variability in heart rate toward youth with insecure attachment styles, particularly fearful or preoccupied attachment styles. Horses behaved less predictably toward youth with a secure attachment style. Here is what we must do going forward to ensure well-being for both horse and human. If we view our human relationships, we strive for support, understanding, respect, love. Why would we not want the same in our equine relationships? Ideas of dominance, leadership, submission, and suppression of natural behaviors do not equate to friendship or a consensual relationship. Consensual interactions, for me, are a prime consideration. Listen to the horse. What is he telling you? If he pulls his head away when you want to bridle him, he's clearly telling you that this is not fun. If she lines herself up alongside the mounting block of her own free will, she's telling you that she's looking forward to spending the next hour with you. A couple of weeks ago, Lisa Ashton hosted a fabulous workshop on agency. Agency is the capacity to make, incite, inspire, and ask others to do things. Does agency equal free will? If we concede that horses are sentient beings, then we must also accept that they have or need agency. We need to allow our horses to think, provide opportunities to build resilience, and give tools for the horses to say yes or no. While it is fairly easy to determine when a horse is not experiencing good welfare, particularly in terms of physical signs, we must also educate ourselves in recognizing indicators of positive experience. And not only that, we must provide opportunity for horses to express those indicators of positive experience. In today's world, social license to operate, or SLO, is becoming more important. If we want to continue to be able to ride our horses, drive horses, show horses, train horses, then we as an industry must pull together to prove that we are providing benefits, agency, and positive experiences for horses. The use of whips, spurs, restrictive nosebands, certain training practices must be questioned and scrutinized, and, based on evidence, either accepted or abandoned according to their effects on their horse. We must make certain that any interaction we have with our horses is ethically defendable to the uneducated public. Lack of knowledge is a barrier to progress, but even more challenging is convincing a population to change what they have always done. Thompson and Haig examined reasons why people were unwilling to embrace equitation science as a progressive means to justify interactions with horses, and found 4 major reasons why this might be so. 1. Science discounts the feel a rider has when physically in contact with her horse. 2. Science is overrated. Those with many years' experience with horses can tell you the same things, or alternatively, science can never explain the relationship. 3. Science is a gimmick. It is overused and easy for anyone to use to justify their actions. And 4, science is reductionist in that it tries to standardize that which is individualistic. Nevertheless, equitation science has an important role in horse welfare, and communicating the wealth of knowledge generated by equitation scientists is the key. It is not just about relating the results. There are skeptics to science, and merely reporting scientific results, even in lay language, is generally not a successful approach. Opponents of science are likely intuitive thinkers. Thus, communication should address intuitive modes of thinking. It is critical to acknowledge that relationships with horses take place on an individual level, not as a general representation of the species horse. Focus on the importance of positive psychological and emotional experiences for the human with a horse. Acknowledge the importance of feeling as well as knowing. If welfare benefits to the horse can be enjoyed by the human, then there is a reward for the human behavior change, for equine welfare. Additionally, anthropomorphism is a slippery edge. We all know the dangers of anthropomorphism and how it may cloud our understanding of the individual animal's Umwelt. For example, in my survey on whether people believed horses could feel certain emotions, even though most survey participants believed that horses could feel pain, they did not believe that pain was a reason for conflict behaviors demonstrated under TAC. But anthropomorphism may also play an important role in furthering the horse-human bond, as it is from our human perspective of relationships that we can explore what might be relevant to the horse. As humans, we are social beings as well as with our own circle of social contacts. Each of us has the capacity to touch many lives around us, and with the ripple effect, we have the power to spread the knowledge we ourselves have gained. By being the model, we are the best champion for the horse. Although we train horses to do things, we also have something to learn from them. We are part of a horse's Umwelt and play a pivotal role to the individual horse. We also need to pay attention to their Umwelt and recognize the individuality of it. Although all horses will respond as a horse, they also respond in their own way. Every response is for a reason, and we need to be aware of the reasonings behind the horse's actions. So go out there and determine if your horse actually likes to be hugged. If so, go ahead and hug them. If not, find out what your horse does like and do that instead. Listen, watch, and learn. Bearing in mind all that we know about horses and all that we still have to learn, it is quite possible for the outside of a man or a woman to be good for the inside of a horse. Through awareness of our horse's Umwelt, we have the ability to make that happen. Thanks for listening.